We're going to move to further debate. I recognize the member for Don Valley East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it is an honour to rise in this chamber, in this August chamber, on behalf of the constituents of Don Valley East and on behalf of the people of Ontario, particularly on an issue that is a crisis to so many of us, and that is, of course, on housing. You know, just earlier this morning, the member from York Centre spoke about visionary plans. But there's nothing visionary about rewriting plans over and over and over, because, in fact, this is the third time this government has rewritten urban development policy since October 2022. And so you'll forgive me for believing that sometimes it feels like they're just making it up as they go along. And that's not intended to be a dig at this government. It's an expression of concern from the people of Ontario and, of course, for myself included. You know, when this bill was first announced, the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing spoke of flexibility and boosting housing supply. Translated, what he really was saying is that he wants to be able to do whatever he wants. Madam Speaker, Ontario needs housing. We all know that. But Bill 97 fails to consider its agricultural, economic, and environmental consequences, nor its consequences for tenants and for residents. On the matter of agricultural and environmental issues, sweeping, unchecked urban sprawl is an asset to nobody, especially when this government neglects basic city services like hospitals and schools. But this government, sadly, is not interested in feedback. After all, they're stripping away power from municipalities, the local jurisdictions who know their communities best and know how the negative consequences of Bill 97 could unfold. And, Madam Speaker, the consequences may be significant, and had the government bothered to meaningfully consult with stakeholders, they would know that. Here's one stakeholder. The Ontario Federation of Agriculture, representing over 80% of Ontario's farmers, has voiced opposition to the bill, as Schedule 6 will severely reduce the already diminished amount of agricultural land in our province. This government just wants to plop multi-lot residential areas in prime rural farmland and walk away saying it built a few houses, and this simply is not good enough. This government hasn't considered the environmental implications of what it is proposing. The changes, for example, made under Schedule 6, will tear into green space and exponentially increase our carbon emissions. And without public transport, hospitals, schools, employment areas, residents will need to drive to get where they're going, emitting even more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. From an economic perspective, cities currently designate lands as employment land, places for industry and economic development. This legislation circumvents these rules so that developers can build on those very lands. This will contribute to force new residents to commute long distances for basic services and for infrastructure, because it's an attempt at a housing plan without an accompanying infrastructure plan. And so this government forgets that livable housing doesn't just mean access to a roof and four walls. Access to a grocery store, a school, a hospital. These are all critical to the success of a community as well and are not provided under this bill. Bill 97 also removes the rule for municipalities that stipulates they must prove the need to expand before they push their official urban boundaries outward. Municipalities could rezone land without requiring evidence or studies. This bill seeks to do away with the Municipal Comprehensive Review. This is, as you know, the review every 5 years that municipalities undertake about lands which should be employment lands and which lands should no longer be those. The land needs assessment is also being done away with, a valuable assessment that looks at populations to determine employment lands. All of this means fewer local jobs, more commuting, more pollution. On the topic of affordable housing, because this is not just an environmental issue, it is a complete or even a complete disregard towards protecting agricultural lands. This bill offers little to no substantial policies to address or promote affordable housing. For example, Schedule 2 doesn't just diminish the authority of municipalities, which is a point I'll get back to, but it also opens up many avenues to avoid the development of affordable housing units and fair treatment for tenants. The new regulatory control over demolition and conversion of rental units could easily give the province the power to weaken or even eliminate rental replacement bylaws. Rental replacement bylaws play an integral role in ensuring tenants who are forced out of their homes due to demolition or conversion are properly supported, either through financial compensation or replacement homes. And in a report done by the City of Toronto, which highlighted concerns of Bill 97, it stated, and I quote, "From 2018 to 2022, the City approved nearly 2,500 replacement units at below market rents, i.e. meeting the City's definition of affordable or mid-range rents. Without the ability to regulate replacement rents, this existing stock of housing, affordable to low and moderate income households would have been lost." This government loves to talk about the housing crisis as though it is only an issue of lack of supply. And while that certainly is one of the issues, affordable housing must be and remain a key priority. Nothing in this bill suggests that policies would be put in place to help ensure and guarantee that homebuyers are given affordable options, or that tenants are protected against price gouging or given fair rights. And on my final point about the diminishment of municipal power, what seems very apparent in this bill is that this government is intent to suggest that municipalities are ill-equipped to understand and address the unique needs of their own region. It also seems to suggest that every municipality in Ontario is facing identical issues when it comes to housing, even though this is simply not true. The housing crisis looks very different in northern regions of Ontario versus more urban regions. The unique needs of each region cannot be solved by a one-size-fits-all approach. Yet this is exactly what Bill 97 is proposing by diminishing the authority of municipalities completely and giving that complete control to the ministry. For example, changes in Schedule 1 of the bill allow the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing to appoint his own inspectors necessary for the enforcement of this Act. This required appealing subsection 4 of the Building Code Act, which once stipulated that inspectors would be appointed under Part 3 of the Public Service of Ontario Act, the Public Service Commission in charge of appointing public servants. Their mandate is to ensure nonpartisan recruitment and employment of public servants that the PSC or its delegates appoint to employment by the Crown. Can the minister make that guarantee? Can the people of Ontario expect that of this government? If the past is any indication of the future, then the answer, unfortunately, is no. And this matters because this government has promised to build Ontarians 1.5 million homes by 2030, and they're afraid of delivering on that. As it is, they're behind schedule. It's worrisome that the minister can now appoint his own inspectors who could easily be directed to fast-track the inspection process in order to expedite the number of homes built. Building homes is good. Building them recklessly is not. When I see that the minister is being given the power to make regulations prescribing anything that is referred to in Section 14, when Section 14 has within it 14 major subsections, I'm concerned. In fact, it gives me flashbacks back to Bill 60. And as a result, a concerning pattern of unaccountability is established in this bill. And so in closing, Madam Speaker, this bill would make sweeping changes to how municipalities grow. It could force 444 Ontario municipalities to grow the same way. Municipalities in Northern Ontario would be subject to the same rules as municipalities in Southwestern Ontario, despite having completely different needs. That is not acceptable. This is not a one-size-fits-all province, and we can't govern like that. Madam Speaker, for once, this government is actually being transparent. They have shown that Bill 97 is their chosen mechanism for throwing out every rule and protection meant to ensure that growth in Ontario is fiscally and environmentally responsible. Just because the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing has a promise to deliver on for the Premier doesn't mean he has a carte blanche to get us there. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move to questions. The member for Durham.
Thank you, Speaker. The member for Don Valley East, I'm sure, is aware that there are thousands of residential tenants, families in rental accommodation that they call home. And our government has in the past brought in measures to strengthen protections for tenants, including fines for bad landlords and measures to prevent evictions. And unfortunately, the opposition chose to vote against those measures. This time, there's an opportunity for the member opposite to support better protections for tenants in this province. Once again, my question to the member for Don Valley East, on behalf of his constituents, will he join us in supporting these enhanced protections for tenants?
Thank you. The member for Don Valley East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I absolutely categorically support increased protections for tenants. And it's a little bit hypocritical to hear from the other side that they support those protections when they have, for example, done away with rent control and implemented policies that have resulted in unprecedented economic hardship for my constituents in Don Valley East. And so I'm proud to stand here on behalf of those same constituents, to hold this government to account, to point out that they have made life more difficult for tenants, more difficult for renters, more expensive for renters, and to point out that, unfortunately, to call these piecemeal efforts that are unclear, it's inappropriate to do so.
Next question, the member for Niagara Falls.
Thank you very much. And if you care about renters, and how is it in Toronto? The average rent in Toronto is $3,000. What new Canadian or young person can afford $3,000 for the rent right here in Toronto? What are we doing? You're not protecting renters. You're not protecting young people. You're not protecting families in the province of Ontario when $3,000 is the average of rents here in Toronto. So my question is, in my riding in Niagara Falls, I'm hearing from residents that are facing significant rent increases because they live in units built after 2018. In some cases, they can't afford to rent anymore. Do you think we should have rent controls for all units built in the province of Ontario? Thank you.
Thank you. The member for Don Valley East.
I thank you very much for your question. I mean, we saw exactly what happened when this government did away with rent control. And I'll point out that the Liberals in our last election platform, in fact, called for that rent control to be restored. I was just in St. Catharines and in the Niagara region within the last few days, and have heard from your constituents, who thank you for your advocacy, by the way, but who point out that housing is out of control for them, that rent is out of control for them, and that this government, the present government, hasn't done anything for them in order to make that issue go away. And this bill certainly won't.
Thank you. Next question. Member for Bruce Owen Sound.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for his comments. As I think about all the housing initiatives that our government is doing, I think of my own family situation where I've got 3 sons, 20s and early 30s. And, they don't have the opportunity in housing that us older baby boomers have had. And back in the last millennium when I started my first job, you could get a job and find a place to work, or to live. That math worked. Well, for this generation, our generation of young folks and many that are coming, that math does not work. And for me, that is what's fundamental about what we're doing. As I said in the previous question, none of this is easy. If it was easy, we wouldn't have this problem. So will the member and his party, or will the member join us in this goal of getting 1.5 million homes built so that those young people can find a place to stay?
Thank you. The member for Don Valley East for the quick response.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do appreciate the ambition of the member across to deliver 1.5 million homes over 10 years, a call that we ourselves, the Liberal Party has called for and had committed to in the last election. However, building 1.5 million homes in 10 years does not have to be mutually exclusive with doing it in a thoughtful way, one that listens to farmers, protects agricultural farmland, protects our economy, and makes sure that we work with our municipalities and collaborate together. This is fundamentally the difference, that we're willing to work with partners and to consider all of the potential consequences, just not allow things to happen in unregulated.
Thank you very much.